interview series. Take a load off from your busy workday and listen to the dulcet tunes of our guests, who are all over the cybersecurity landscape. We're going to ask them some hard questions, not going to lie, probably some softballs too. But no matter what, it's going to be a good time. So sit back, pour yourself a nice hot cup of coffee, or something stronger if it's that time of day, and enjoy Coffee Talk with Serge. Sherrod, the first question we want to ask you today is we're going to drop you right in.
Drop me in.
Drop you right in.
It's
How
like
do you
I
feel?
say, okay.
No,
What?
no, you can't even give your own opinion. You have to answer this. How do you
Okay.
feel about the socks this year from CyberWarCon?
Oh, the socks is here for CyberWarCon.
Hard
Well,
question.
so first I want to make it clear that I did receive a pair of socks. I did, as I did the year before, as I did for SleuthCon and BrunchCon. I always get the socks.
Some people don't.
I've heard of those people.
John Holquist hates, like myself, do not get socks.
I'm not one of them. I'm a sock receiver.
You're a sock receiver. SOC or SOCK?
SOCK.
Obviously.
Yeah.
Welcome, everyone, to Coffee Talk with Serge, the interview series. Today we're here with Sherrod DeGrippo, wonderful human being and author of Bluenomicon, InfoSec famous for many years, but more importantly, a wonderful human being and very, very well-spoken and smart. We're going to talk for 25, 35, 45 minutes. We'll see where the spirit takes us. We have a wide variety of subjects, starting off with footwear and John Holquist's absolute odd decision to continue down that route, but we'll get back to that at a later date. Sherrod, we always like to start off with a little bit about yourself. Can you just tell us how you got here today? Not specifically like on this podcast, but just overall the cybersecurity world where you came from.
Sure. So, did you ever have Thrasher Magazine, the skateboard
Absolutely,
magazine?
100%.
So I was 14. I had a subscription to Thrasher Magazine because I thought it was cool. And in the back of Thrasher Magazine in 1992, there was a Thrasher Magazine BBS. Bulletin board system. For those of you who are a little younger, might not remember these. It was dial-up, and I asked my dad if I could have a modem, and he said, "Sure." It was PCMCIA, so I'd actually put it into my computer.
Now, was this before or after you had your ham license?
Probably about a year after. So I got my.
Okay. I was gonna say, would he even let you had like?
I don't know.
Yeah.
He might have been like, you need to get your ham license first. So I am KD4 RBD, Kilo Delta 4 Radio Delta Bravo. And yeah, so I've been a ham radio licensee since 1992. And I got on Thrasher BBS in 93. I had a really nerdy, so I got on the Thrasher BBS and subsequently racked up an insane amount of long distance bills. Another thing that is a time of, from a bygone era, we don't have long distance bills anymore, but it was very expensive. I was 14. My father was very angry that I'd spent like $300 dialing into the Thrasher BBS. And that's when I learned about something called beige boxing, which is when you take a lineman's handset out to those beige boxes out in the neighborhoods, and you make long distance phone calls for free. Wow. So anyway, security is very important to me. No. Yeah. So I got my.
Now you're on a podcast.
And then I got on a podcast. There's nothing in between. I started as a systems administrator at a publishing company, and worked at an ISP after that. And the ISP, one of the customers got hacked, and so I did incident response, and that was probably in 2002. And it was my first time doing any of that. And I fell in love with incident response and security and hardening systems. And a fun fact about that incident was that it was a hacked version. It was an insecure version of PHP BB that caused me to work my first incident. And it was awesome. I loved it.
And this was with your computer science degree and your graduate degree as well?
That's right. So I started college in 1996 when I was 18. And 1996 was a very different time. I majored in fine art because cybersecurity wasn't a word most people said at all in 1996. So
yeah, was it even a word?
Photography major in college.
Yeah. So ongoing, I find many of the people that I've become best friends with cybersecurity are really just frustrated liberal art majors.
Yeah, or fine arts majors,
Fine
which
art,
is
yeah.
even more horrifying. It's not
MFA, yeah.
horrifying, it's great. My arts education's fantastic. I love it.
I mean, would you be a room rated, what, 9 out of 10? Recently room rated 9 out of 10, Twitter or X? I can't keep up with it. I mean,
I know I
what's that
got a
to say?
good rating on Room but I'm seeing my cord violations right we Yikes.
Got to drop down to 7 out of 10. This is going to be horrible. It's going to
Oh no,
plummet.
I gotta move those cords.
There we go. So a little bit of background there, and then you started off sysadmin, like many of us who started before cyber was a word. You kind of got interested in the adversary side of it, the actual hacking part, and then you went yada 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 to Microsoft. Was there an in between, or did you
Yeah.
start using Microsoft Word and like, this is it for me? I like badly formatted text. My career done.
No, I was a word perfect girl because we didn't have any money. So,
Libra.
after that, I went to work at the National Nuclear Security Administration in Las Vegas and specialized in counterintelligence threats to information technology, as well as securing our nation's nuclear weapons stockpile via the national labs. I loved that work. I love the national lab system. NNSA is a fantastic capability to secure our nuclear information. I learned a lot there. I also learned that working in government financially was probably not going to be tenable for me.
If anyone wants to do a side note, there's a great This American Life, I think, about the difference of a FFRDC, federally funded research division, FFRD committee, something like that. Anyway, go look up why the nuclear arsenal for America is stored with the DOE and why it's also in a private sector. Very fascinating, but it's a complete side note. For those who've never looked into it, NNSA is a fascinating rabbit hole to go down.
And yes, it's fascinating and so weird. And I saw the weirdest. I can't talk about them, but they were weird. Yeah, and NNSA is an agency within DOE, which is where our nuclear capabilities belong. Even devices belong in DOE. So after DOE, I took my first commercial security job at a company called Lyric, which was then acquired by SecureWorks, working in consulting there. And subsequently, I went on to work at only security vendors. So I worked at government, and for the past 17 years, I've been in security vendors. Most recently, Symantec, SecureWorks, and then most recently Proofpoint, and then now Microsoft. So I like being in the vendor world and making products and seeing things from that point of view to secure lots and lots of organizations.
Now, Sherrod, you and I have had a lot of conversations about threat modeling, which I'll put to a different.
Okay.
Yeah, we'll get. Don't worry, that's coming back. That's coming back, baby. But first off, one of the things we've had some very recent conversations about when we were at Black Hat and DEF CON together was around criminal groups, Crimeware versus APT, and why you think APTs are pointless and should be given ridiculous names like Tempest Bikinis, and why Crimeware. Strawberry. Sorry, it's so hard to keep up with the professional names there. But I am curious, what are your thoughts here? It's, I am actually kind of coming around to your viewpoint, not surprisingly, perhaps, but it is an interesting world where a lot of people with, my background being mostly government, mostly secret squirrel stuff, for me, nation state was always the interesting thing. And now when I really looked at the global impact, I've kind of started saying, A, is there a big difference in today's economy between nation state and Lazarus Group and Crimeware? And then B, who actually has a bigger impact on the average citizen of the world? Probably not GRU. I think that's kind of some of the stuff that's been inspired by conversations you've had with me. But could you kind of give some of your treaties, your manifesto on why we should stop caring and start looking at the Bitcoins? That's what you said, right? I'm synthesizing.
Yeah, I want to say this is mischaracterizing my point of view just a little bit. I personally love Crimeware. I find Crimeware ecosystems to be fascinating. The threat actor psychology of criminal threat actors is fascinating to me. And I just don't know how somebody could read the Conti leaks and not just go wild for Crimeware. It's just so crazy. It's like a movie. It's insane. I love Crimeware. Nation-sponsored threats, to be quite honest, are incredibly important, but I do feel that they kind of trigger a little bit of fear in me in the world. Like, oh gosh, what's the word? Oh no. Whereas Crimeware, I just really feel like we have a handle on it. I do feel like generally in the enterprise, that's something that we understand, that we can work on, that we can think about, that we can have a lot of impact against. It's more interesting to me. I personally enjoy Crimeware more than nation-sponsored APT threats. That said, I do know that APT is very, very important, and I do have CyberWarCon socks. But also I work on SleuthCon, which is the Crimeware Congress. So I see the value and fascination in both of these things, of course. And then like you brought up, like Lazarus or the DPRK actors have this weird crime crossover because they're stealing currency to try to prop up a regime and facilitate an economy of a state. That's cool too. But yeah, I love crime.
We got into it last year, I guess, a year and a half ago now. Shannon Davis, one of the researchers on my team, did a really big ransomware piece of work. We actually presented at the Microsoft DCC conference earlier this year on it, or later last year. Anyway, point is, what I got fascinated in was the raw economics of it. It was like Adam Smith's invisible hand of God moving the world in terms of just like, there is no regulation, there are no real consequences unless you happen to do something that someone determines a window 5 floors up is now your firing strategy for you in Russia. But overall, I found it interesting because you can actually watch like the cause and effect of economic change within an ecosystem that I am inherently part of. And so seeing things like Shannon's work getting published about how fast, so the basic there was we did work on how fast ransomware actually encrypted, and which is not something people had really been publishing on, but we noticed that the Crimeware syndicates were actually publishing advertisements about their ransomware was the fastest. And so to them, that was the thing they thought was the most important. So we said, oh, well, let's test it. So we did it. And at the end of it, people started going on the Lockbit forums and basically arguing with the Lockbit authors about like the speed of their ransomware using our research as like the point of, hey, you said this and now there's this. And it's like, what a weird world where people are like looking for truth in advertising within the Crimeware ecosystem based on the research done to try to help blue teams. And just that whole world to me became very fascinating very quickly.
So you really sort of put out like a Forrester Wave Gartner Magic Quadrant of ransomware?
Yeah, it was basically, we looked for people who are doing this globally, and we found that no one had done this from a commercial point of view. The only people who had done it was Lockbit, where they actually went through and ranked 30 other ransomware vendors or organizations, Crimeware groups, and how fast their ransomware was. So we actually took the same metrics they used, put it up in a lab, and actually tested how fast it went across a corpus of about 100,000 files, about 50 gigs, and did it on different stacks and published the entire work.
It's like a Consumer Reports.
Yeah, it's. I like the Gartner Forrester Wave. I mean, the point of it was really what we were looking at was how do you, if you're a network defender, can you actually defend against ransomware once it executes? And the reality is no. Like regardless of what vendors say, like once it starts, it's kind of like gangrene. You just gotta cut it off, right?
Wow, what a comparison.
I have other ones, but they're too spicy for this channel. But
send it to me in DM.
Slide in there. But yeah, the idea there was it was just too much. It's too fast. And so instead of focusing on detecting ransomware after it executed, can you detect it before? And what we found was our biases aside, how ransomware operators work within a network is startlingly similar to how an APT network or adversary works through a network. And so you can actually double dip. And like that's where I started to really have to check my own biases and unfortunately listen to you more around just like, A, this is really interesting. And B, these days, I don't know how far apart a lot of these adversaries are, except for maybe Turla, but they're their own special, or what do you call Turla now?
I would have to look on the Rosetta spreadsheet that we have,
like
which is available for download on the Microsoft Threat Intelligence website. You can download the spreadsheet. It's also available in JSON format.
There we go.
And I check it every single day. Yeah, no, I think that's a good point, right? So we're seeing the criminal ecosystem actors. Honestly, I really thought a lot more new groups would come in as the landscape evolved in terms of like security posture organizations, but it actually seems like it's been more of a consolidation of some of the groups that we expected to kind of disperse a little bit have gotten stronger and more consolidated and gone on to be a little bit more APT style or nation sponsored style in their persistence and their tactics. But then at the same time, a lot of the APT groups are leveraging like common off the shelf Crimeware bits and pieces to get their stuff done too. So
I mean,
It's like
Cobalt
threat
Strike,
actor is
Cobalt
threat
Strike,
actor.
Cobalt
Yeah.
Strike, right? Like that's I'd love to say it's different, but how are adversaries getting the network? Oh, they're using a spear phishing email that goes to Cobalt Strike and pivoting, and you can swap out APT actor this for Crimeware group that.
I love that though. I think part of what we do, and I want to talk about this too, but I think like part of what we do really in a lot of ways is about this subjective understanding. And when people talk about staying one step ahead, they're not talking necessarily about deploying a specific technology that puts them ahead. They're talking about using subjective reasoning from really talented experts in the threat intelligence space to figure out a chess move of what that threat actor is going to do next. And I think that that's one of the things that's so interesting about threat intelligence, right? Is that it's very human focused, which, like, going back to my origins and computer nerd stuff, I was on BBSs to talk to people. And I think that it's a very clear path to threat intelligence for me because I want to watch other people communicate. I want to see what people want to know about. Those are things that are really interesting to me. And then layer crime on top of it. It's a win-win.
It is fun when you get enough threat intelligence folks together in a room, maybe some alcohol has been flowing, and you find that there's this almost care for the adversaries that you follow. I distinctly remember when I used to follow some Iranian threat actor groups and they disappeared for a bit. And then later out news reports came out that there had been a crackdown by the IRGC. Like, I realized I was actually worried about these people because I had been invested in their lives for like a year or two. And it's why I got into cybersecurity. I was a sysadmin and I got bored of network share drives dying because somebody wouldn't reset the cluster. And I was like, if I'm going to have to deal with this, I want to deal with it because someone did this maliciously, not idiotly. And
you'd rather have deliberate malfeasance than
I would.
just
I would
accidents.
rather have deliberate malfeasance because at least then there's a reason, not just you're dumb. Like, why? And like that's why I got into it, and like it turns into a people thing, and that's part of what I love about. And I do find a lot of fine arts and liberal art majors, whether they finish or not, in threat intelligence because
I didn't
was
graduate
not
from
a
college.
dig. I didn't
I
even
got
go
a
to undergrad.
CISSP and a ham radio license. Like, what
That's all
else?
you need.
How many SAM certs do I
don't.
have? Like, a lot.
I don't
That's
even have
enough.
an undergraduate. Okay, so there's no
Me
shaming
either.
here.
I don't have
See?
anything.
There
I
we
have a
go.
CISSP.
It's an incredible career in history and knowledge. But
and
my
a great
point there is,
vibe.
it's great. That's what I go for. I'm not room
I got
rated
a good
yet.
vibe. You'll get there.
It was
You're in the
someday.
office though. You can't do it in the office. It's not
No,
fun.
it'd be awkward. Especially Sarah was walking back and forth. She'll never even know she's on this podcast. It's lovely.
Special guest Sarah, unknowing,
guest Sarah.
non-consensual podcast guesting. Who?
Yeah.
But I want to make a point actually about threat actors and how we feel about them. I am very much a big believer in the Gaudy Everyone philosophy. We do not glorify threat actors. We glorify defenders. I am here 100% to glorify defenders. And I think that for me, that is part of why the renaming for the Microsoft threat actor switches was important. One, we were running out of elements. Let's just accept mathematically it wasn't going to work anymore. But two,
I will say, I remember the first time I ever saw that grid. I was like, I guess we're just going to stop at like 110 or 12 or whatever it is.
We solved security.
We solved cyber. After that, it was just done.
No more. But I think it is really important that we go through that renaming exercise because one, it gives us infinite options for naming. But two, I don't want to be a part of a situation where we are glorifying a threat actor and making them, appear like this, like we're watching a Hollywood movie. It's not a Hollywood movie. People's feelings and realities and jobs and finances and identities are really being impacted. It's not funny. It's interesting. It's fascinating. It's a thought process and an experiment and a problem to solve. But ultimately, we need to glorify defenders. And that means putting threat actor naming at a place that's much more neutral.
So you just ruined my special guest, Vlad, who is about to come on.
Oh, no.
But it's all right. He's going back to his dacha. He's going to take his limo.
From
Ooh,
yeah,
sorry.
wow. Okay.
I'm not going to bring him on now. You don't want to glorify him, which I understand.
I don't, but I have a lot of questions though that I want to ask.
I was going to ask Vlad.
Crumbs on me.
One of the reasons I keep going back to Crimeware is the confluence of just the world in terms of cyber and the output, right? And you mentioned the impact people's lives. Like, and I think a lot of times we all get spun up on this concept that, especially in the threat intel world, like the nation state side, like defending defense industrial base, like these are obviously very important. But from a point of view of the Crimeware family, like that has a much bigger impact on a larger number of people at almost a more visceral level. Like it can be very impactful if a company loses a lot of money from a stock point of view, but it can destroy people's livelihoods when it's a small, medium business and a dentist in a rural part of Texas or Georgia goes out of business because they can't bill their customer for 3 months or a month and a half, or they lose all the records. Like that's a much more visceral impact than, large, dollar sign Acme vendor who can't sell missiles for a month. It could have an impact, but like on an average citizen, it's probably much bigger. Where are the places that you see that network defenders should be looking for this sort of really true information or more information around Crimeware? Like you mentioned SleuthCon, which I love. Like, are there other places that folks should be looking at for this?
I mean, for me personally, from a professional enjoyment standpoint, I love a DOJ indictment. I find that people I'm sure ask you all the time. People ask me all the time. I want to get into information security. I want to get into cyber threat intelligence. What should I do? And I have two answers. This is my answer, and I give you these answers because they are beneficial to me. One, if you want to get into information security, start learning how to read PCAPs, start understanding the network. If you don't know your ingress and egress into a network, you're not going to be able to defend the organization. Information is really only lost one way, and that's over a network. Very rarely do we deal with local, attacks. Everything is pretty much going to be going over a network. So if you have that under control, you're doing really well. And if you want to get into cyber threat intelligence, just start reading indictments. Everyone can do that. You don't need your own telemetry to be able to read indictments. And I think that what those indictments do for people is that it lays out this fantastic point of view. If an indictment has been made, typically that means that there's a lot of great information that can be shared. The story can be written up. And we see them come out from the DOJ pretty frequently, and they're often in collaboration with law enforcement agencies globally. So they've got this global perspective. Reading DOJ indictments for Crimeware, I think, is one of the most fascinating, interesting things you can do. Like, I print them out. I have a highlighter and I like circle things that I think are cool. The indictments are the way to go if you want to start into threat intelligence.
What I love about this, two things. One, last week we had, or the last one of these we did, which aired 2 weeks ago now, we had Jamie Williams from the MITRE ATT&CK team on.
And I love him. I'm a huge fan of him. Yes. I love him.
They're smart. And I asked him how he went through and does MITRE ATT&CK TTPs. And of course, what he says is, basically, I print them out. I get my highlighter, I get a pen, and you start going through. He's like, that's how you kind of do it. The second part, ooh, nice. I'm a huge fan of the DOJ indictments because they are written for an audience that doesn't necessarily know all the details about cybersecurity. Because if you're unfamiliar with these attorneys, the FBI, the folks writing these indictments are often writing them for judges or people in law enforcement who may be cybersecurity knowledgeable, but not cybersecurity experts. And so a lot of times they're using vocabulary and terminology in order to explain it to an audience that is not in the weeds like we are. And so to your point, I think it's a great place for people to start because it's written to be understandable. Otherwise, the judge will not go through with the indictment. The grand jury will not fulfill the needs of the DOJ. And so it's a great place from just a reading level point of view to start because it's written for an audience that is not you and I.
Absolutely. And I also feel like things come out in those indictments that no matter how good your telemetry is, you never have it all. And they really kind of sew those puzzle pieces together. That's a weird metaphor. They sew the pieces together so that they make sense from a global perspective, because it has to be enough to make an indictment. And DOJ indictments, I've found, especially for Crimeware, are written beautifully.
Speaking of writing beautifully, what a wonderful segue. Normally I have one of my books right here and I would show it, but I'm in the office today, as we saw with Mary. But you were a wonderful author for the best-selling collection of essays, Bluenomicon. There we go. And you have had one of the most popular essays written, at least reported to me, And I'm not
Okay.
just saying that to everyone who comes on this show. But Sherrod, would you mind going over what you wrote about and some of the higher level, like let's talk about it. Coffee talk with Sherrods on
Okay.
your essay.
So I had about, I'm going to think it's about 8 years ago now. I came in to lead a team at Proofpoint that focused on network defense and writing network signatures, the emerging threats team. And one of the members on that team, you know, pretty late at night messaged me and was talking about something. And I was like, hey, man, it's kind of late. Why don't you, I know where you live. I know where you live. Like, go to bed. And he said, well, I'm just going to do one more SIG. And if you've got that mindset in security, you're going to burn out. Just one more SIG, just one more update, just one more firewall request, just one more ticket. It's not sustainable. And I really believe that you should prioritize your work with emergencies and have to do, the super fun things to do, and then the things that nobody really wants to do. And in security, you're probably only going to make it through the have to do and the want to do. And the stuff that nobody wants to do that isn't really that important, you're probably not going to get to it. And you should accept that, because tomorrow you're starting over, because the threat actors are starting over again tomorrow too. It's just not a reality to be able to go forever. And so it's really important to me that we take care of the people in the industry that are doing things like writing SIGs and doing tickets and doing incident response and having those brutal schedules. There's a human side to it that we have to take care of. And that really was kind of my point in the chapter, is do the things that fill you up, because if you don't ever make time for those, you're going to burn out.
I love that for multiple reasons. One of which is when I've worked with organizations, when I've done consulting or talked to them about their tier one, especially, and they're like, we have such high burnout, such high turnover for our tier one, our early career SOC, and then what are your thoughts? And it's like, oh well, how are you rewarding them, or what are you having them do? And so often these people, they walk in and they have 100 tickets, and they, the Sisyphean task of doing, SOC tickets, where every day you come in and every day your organization has had a compromise or a security incident, and there's never any change. Every day you just come in and it's a new ticket with the same problem from a different computer, and there's no change and there's no reward and there's no sense of accomplishment, because you're just kind of going through this over and over again. And we see this with signature writers as well. I experience even this at Splunk, where we work a lot with the rapid response for breaking new cybersecurity events, and it's like, well, that will never end. There's no end to, this was the summer of CVEs, right? In between Fortinet and VMware and Citrix, like it just came out every week, it felt like. And that's why I really loved your essay, was it kind of talks about this aspect of how you deal with that. Everything can't be emergencies. Everything can't be a breaking event. And how do you deal with that as you go through? One of the questions I had for you was, how do you organize your day then? Like, as you went through, kind of going through, did you have how do I prioritize to make sure I'm doing the things I need to and letting the things fall to the side that have to?
That's a great question. And I hope I don't scandalize too many people, but I only really aim to do 6 things a day.
6? Look, you're 3 times or twice as good as I am. I do 3 things.
3 things. So, well, 2 of mine are personal. So I do 2 personal things and 4 work things approximately a day. And I write down the things on a piece of paper in the morning, and I try to get through them, and I try to save Friday to be pretty open. For the ones that didn't get checked off that day, they go into a pile on the right side of my desk, and I start going back through them on Friday to try to get anything that I missed. But I think it's unrealistic to assume that people are going to get lots and lots of things done in a day well, right? Like, you can do a bunch of garbage, but if you're going to do things that are really done well and impactful, you have to cut down. And I also am a huge, crazy, huge believer in having impact and evaluating the work you're doing to see if it really does have impact, because it's very easy to get caught up in doing a bunch of things that don't move any needles anywhere, like much less make big moves. And so I think the thing that people, if they want to move forward in their career, especially, do the things that give you big moves, that make big progress, and accepts that the incremental stuff just might not get done, but it's worth it to trade it out for a big move thing.
I love that. It's I every day I have a notepad or just an index card basically, and I put down 10 things, and I basically try to get through 3 of them. And then every day I carry over and I just cross out and I put them in a pile. So it's a very similar thing. It's like I know me, I know I'm only really going to be able to focus on 3 things. But I like to have a variety of like, 3 biggish things and then like a whole bunch of stuff that I go through, like I need a brain break, I need to go through. But what I haven't talked about before, which I love that you brought this up, the whale idea of making impact. One of my colleagues, Kirsty Payne, introduced me to a blog. There's a presentation that was given called the glue work, which is this concept that a lot of people do work that is very impactful, but it's not promotable or it's not making a difference for their career or themselves, but it's helping the greater good. Often it tends to be a very gendered aspect of a career or a team. And so folks do all this incredible work and then they find out later like, oh, well, that was wonderful, but that's not your actual job. We're so happy you did that, but that's not your actual job. So what did you do for me this week? And what I find when I talk to people about this is they haven't done that self-reflection of like, what's your job description? What are your metrics for success for your job? Are you fulfilling those? And more importantly, as we often find out, I think, do you even have metrics of success from your boss and your role? Because a lot of times people don't have that or they don't know what they are. And then they're frustrated of, I don't know how I'm doing. It's like, well, what are you measuring yourself against? And if you've never done that, then you're going to have that frustration. So I like your point there about doing those big things and knowing what they are and determining if you've gone through. Has that been, for you, has that been one of the career success metrics or methods for you?
I think so. I also, as you were describing these concepts of things that you do that aren't your job, oh, my whole career is not my job, I feel like.
Well, that's what's been hard for me. Like when I read it, I've never been promoted because I did what my job was. I've never gotten further in my career because of doing what my job, but I apparently was very good at identifying what the big thing was that I should do. So it was a fascinating, I'll send the blog over. It's a really good read. And I believe in both of these. Like, I think there is a lot of non-promotable work that can be done. But at the same time, I got hired for one job. At no point was I hired at Splunk to do a podcast for a research group I founded with Sherrod. But here we are today.
I mean, it's a win-win for us in the end. I think, you have to kind of say, and it comes back to having a good leader too. Like you want a leader who says, we do the things that are the right things for the organization, the right things for the company, or the right things for, a skip level kind of wide organization. You want someone who values that. But I'll tell you, if you have a leader who doesn't value that, you've got to get real objective, real fast and say, these are my objectives. These are my goals. These are my success criteria. Are you okay with this? And do you sign off on these? And if you don't have that conversation, you might be kind of restricting your own progress, because that's what it takes with some leaders is saying, this is what I'm going to do. Now, there are other leaders like me who were like, oh, that was so cool that you did that podcast, or that was so cool that you did that speaking event, or that's not your job, but it helps the company, it helps the organization, it helps
the vision.
It helps the vision, and it helps underline the culture and the philosophy that we have in the team. And as long as you spend, some decent amount of time on that and do your main job, then we're fine. And I think that a lot of people in security particularly are living in that, this isn't my job space, but it's so important. And you have to figure out how to reconcile that with your leadership.
Which brings us back to the first part of this podcast. Adversaries who do ransomware and crimeware have incredibly successful metrics, right? So we go back to this, like one of the things I love about this new world of crimeware is that they have a visceral, like we do X and we get Y reward. And you can see this as they go through. So I always try to imagine somewhere in St. Petersburg, somewhere in, Vladivostok, like sitting down and a guy going, hey guys, we are down 22% on new infections because Quackbot was disrupted. Like, what are you going to do for me this week? RIP. Like, right. And that's one of the aspects I love of this. It is a business. It is visceral. Like, they have help desk support. They have different languages. You go on these, there's a woman, I can't remember her name, but she was from Target. She was at the one of the conferences I went to, and she said, we need to stop calling it the ransomware economy and start calling it the gig economy, because there is no ransomware gang. It's ransomware binary authors, it's ransomware advertisers, it's ransomware intrusion as access brokers, it's ransomware. And so you kind of go through this, and each one of them have a different metric of success. And I don't know, this all comes back, and I don't know, for me, it's I would be fascinated to know what those, do they go to President Putin's club? Is it
P Club?
P Club? Do they go to Crimea? Like, is that probably not right now? Or maybe right now.
Should we explain what President's Club? Should you explain what President's mean?
For those, well,
have you ever been to President's Club?
I have been to President's Club, yes.
I've never been to President's Club, and I never will, I'm sure, because I don't have those roles. But
for those who don't know, this is a very sales or vendor thing where people who are part of a sales organization are sent on a very lavish vacation by your company to usually somewhere that is very exotic or at least very beach focused. Things like Bali, Hawaii, Italy, Sorrento, places like that. And it's very over the top, but it's part of this sales culture that exists.
And how do those people get to be in President's Club?
There's a variety of different ways. If you are a sales rep, so for those of you watching, you probably have a sales rep to buy software from. They usually have a quota, and they have to hit over 120% or something like that. And then you have folks like myself or Sherrod in different roles that are overlays that are basically part of the sales org very loosely, and they're basically tapped because they produced or helped in a large way at the sales revenue for the company.
I've never been in a potential P Club situation, but I'm jelly about it.
They are work. That is what I tell everyone. At the end of the day, it is work. So
maybe someday.
It is work on the beach in Bali.
Yeah.
So there could be worse things.
So do these criminal threat actors have incentives? Absolutely. So while they may not have an incentive to the level of P Club, which is perfectly legal, by the way, the criminal organizations are not legal, so they might have to do different kinds of incentives that are purely cash. But I think, there's definitely incentives from these gigs. And I do think that that's true. It's become more and more fractured over the past several years when it has become a gig economy. I think something, that people should always remember is that ransomware, encryption for money, started in mass with Lockheed 7 years ago, and it was not the same delivery style it is today. It would be like an attachment to an email, and you would click the attachment, and your individual computer, the lateral movement and the spread through organizations,
maybe worming, but that was about it, right? Like a map drive, maybe
like a file share, like somewhere in like a small business or a printer server or something. But that single computer would be encrypted, and often it was at like someone's personal computer, which wrecked them, or it would be at a company organization. And a lot of IT teams are like, yeah, I don't know, this thing's broke. Let me give you a new laptop. We'll switch you out. We'll take it in. We'll figure it out. And the ransomware groups had to go through so many iterations to evolve to the point that they are today from that place. It's a world that is intentionally and mindfully evolved. They have thought about what these tactics need to be to get out of the success levels that they had before and get them up higher. The other thing that I always remind people is that Lockheed's ransom payment for years was $300 in Bitcoin. And you look at it today, and entire organizations are being ransomed for millions, and they're not ultimately really ransoming data. They're not ultimately really ransoming computers. They're ransoming the ability for that business to do business. They're ransoming their ability to operate. It's not as much about the data and the files and the computers and the encryption. It's about, I'm essentially going to tell you that you can't operate your business unless you pay me. That's what it's about. It's about the operation. It's not about the encryption.
We just had a debate today, Mick Baccio, myself, and Audra Streetman.
I love Mick.
Mick is great. And Audra, she had a really good point earlier this week. She said, I think we should move past the word ransomware and just start calling it all extortionware.
Yeah.
Because ransomware may be a part of extortions, but it's not necessarily nowadays the only thing. And last year I remember talking to folks. I was like, why don't you just get to a point where a ransomware operator pops a network, goes in, does a screenshot of some files, and then just send an email to the CEO and CFO and say, I can do whatever I want. Just pay me now. We don't need to have this public. Just here's the Bitcoin address. I was like, I bet you right now that this is happening all over the place, and we're just not talking about it because it is intentionally being kept below the radar. And employees aren't knowing about it because you're not getting a dancing skull saying like, you've been extorted. It's like, no, I can do it whenever I want. Just make this go away.
And I think that's kind of why I love threat actor psychology. And I love understanding the mindset of the choices that threat actors make. And I'll mention, if you have not seen the Michael Mann movie Heat, and you work in threat intelligence, especially in Crimeware, you've got to see Heat. Like, to me, it is people love the movie Hackers. It's great. Sneakers, great. But that's not really as much into the mindset, I don't think, as Heat gets. And Michael Mann is so good at that. Everything they say and everything they do, I'm like, this is so similar to the way the Crimeware actors operate. They're trying to do their absolute best heist, and they're successful sometimes, sometimes they're not.
It is, going back to the economics of it, it's one of the things I get, one of the few things, that's it, only a few things on Twitter I get irked by, but I'll see these incredible exploits run by red teams. And they're like, this is so cool. This is what everyone needs to defend against. I was like, economically, that doesn't make any sense. Like, what you just did is so much effort to reward versus the grains of sand done by maybe a Chinese APT actor, or just the spray and pray by a ransomware adversary group that's just saying like, hey, we're going to put out the numbers. Somebody's going to click on it. Sometimes we're going to get a whale. Sometimes we're going to get a minnow. But you know what? Low and slow, and it works. Let's just get it done. It's like, no, it's whatever is the bare minimum easiest to get persistence or to get your objective. And that's the same thing with crime. Why, the broken window theory, the jiggle 100 doors and get into the 101st is way better than, oh, I just saw a brand new Mercedes. I'm going to clone the key. I'm going to do this. I'm going to do that. Or here's an idea, just throw a rock through the window.
Yeah, I think that's another thing that we have to always be aware of, is that it's not a Rube Goldbergian complex. These attack chains, they only get as complicated as they need to be to get around defenses. And so once they hit that, point of mass, they just kind of stop. And they're like, okay, this is what it takes. This is what I'm going to do. I'm not going to go overboard. I just want to score.
It's financials, which, speaking of financials, I don't want to take any more of your time of the day. It has been a lovely conversation, Sherrod. Thank you so much for joining us. This has been Coffee Talk with Serge. We'll be back next week with Audra, myself, and Mick, and then every week afterwards in perpetuity until the world burns. Thank you very much. Thank you for being here, Sherrod.
Thanks for having me, Ryan.
Farewell, everyone. Thank you.